Good morning, guys. Welcome to the podcast. Happy MLK Day. And so today, what if I told you our guest addresses the need for effective leadership development, succession planning, and he talks about planful succession. And I'm really happy to have him because all the guests that go to him for this particular skill set. So I'm really happy to have him and dive into the discussion. So, Mark, welcome.
Well, thank you. And I'm really glad I can join you for this conversation.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself and I'm excited to dive into the three topics that we talked about.
Sure. Well, my name is Mark L. Vincent, and the middle initial L is kind of important because I found out some years ago that the actor Vin Diesel has the same given name. So, in order for anybody to even find me in a Google age, I had to start making constant use of my middle initial. So, that's kind of important. I'm an executive advisor, and it's just grown up over a number of years where I worked very much at organizational development, particularly with a process consulting lens, and over time found that I just had a particular skill at helping people at the point that everything they've built is at risk. And that usually looks like business continuity and succession planning. How do we hold this together? And I really enjoy working with people who want their successors to get slingshotted into the future, and so that there's more of what they did together previously. So that's what I spend my time doing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and so today we're going to talk about planful succession and building a legacy beyond leadership. And so talk about the critical elements for creating a seamless leadership transition plan.
Yeah. Well, the one very critical element right at the beginning is if you've been successful with your enterprise, whatever form, for profit, nonprofit, business that relates to government, B2B, B2C, anything along that line. If that's what you're doing, if you try to do it like everybody else has done it, trying to follow some formula, that's a problem because by now you've differentiated yourself. So there's something unique about who you are and how you exist in the marketplace, what your team is, the stage of your life, the experience that you've had, what your strategic plan is from here. So that makes it very individualized. Having said that, there are four very key things to pay attention to. The first is there's a job description from here. At the point you start to really dive toward business succession, that now becomes the job, and it needs to show up, at least for you, as the key criteria of your success. So that job description matters. The second one is a future value balance sheet. So for the business to have continuity beyond here, it's not just about growing the budget this year. It's about making sure everything's capitalized for the future so that successors don't have to stop expanding on the mission and expanding your presence in the marketplace and have to go back and recover and make sure everything's capitalized. So that capitalization plan, talent continuity, all of that factors into that future value balance sheet. And to have that well accounted for is very important. A third one is there's no Gantt chart for this, but you can draw a map. What gets us from here to there so that the different dynamics around talent development, executive leader development, whether you're hiring from the inside or the outside, whether this will go to one person or multiple persons, and do they really own the role? Not just do they think they understand it, but they're actually able to demonstrate that they can carry out what that role will call for. That map is very important, and we could talk about that maybe a bit more. And then the last one is there's a philosophy by which that leader has led. And if it is not well expressed, then people are running around inside the business, not wanting to bump into things that will cause trouble or create offense or undo something. So to make that explicit so that successors can appropriate it and continue with it, expand on it, or even in some very important cases, reject it and put something better in its place. Without that knowing, the people are stumbling around in the dark. So it's a way to get all of the lights on for the room for how the business will operate from here. So those four arenas are very critical to pay attention to.
Yeah, I really love that. And the audience is going to get a lot of value from that. Next thing is talking about is a lot of these intentional planning. You talk about it's essential. And then the three terms of executive leadership and what
Mm-hmm.
is your framework for the evolving executive role? And
Yeah.
we'll dive into it.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that one up. The three turns of executive leadership is not something I invented, but we've built on that in very significant ways across the years. And it's a way of mapping out the executive leader's journey. most people will never be in an executive leader position, and they wouldn't want to be. But there are a few people that really demonstrate an ability to think about systems and to think across an organization rather than just an expertise that they carry. So that's the move from the first to the second turn. First turn of our leadership is learning to lead ourselves. And it's while we're developing our skill set and having experiences, and we need opportunity to fail, make mistakes, restart, maybe even change careers while we figure some things out. And in that process, we'll have experiences where people naturally respond to our leadership capacity or they don't, whether we find we want to lead some projects or not. And somewhere along the way, if we really show that aptitude, we may be given opportunity to move into a second turn, which is to run an organization. We might call that having the P&L responsibility, but the buck will start to stop with our responsibility. That stewardship has been handed to us. And in that second turn, we have to learn to lead the organization as well as to learn to lead others. And we succeed there, not by playing on our expertise, but by continuing to learn, just as we did in the first turn. As we rose in our expertise about these skill sets, we kept learning. And so to run a whole organization, we are now responsible for things where we're not expert. That means we have to keep learning. We have to keep organizing people in a way that they trust and want to participate. And there will be a few of those who then lead so well and so strong and long in one place that they have the opportunity to move into what we'll call the third turn while leading an organization. And this usually starts to show up with people at the earliest, might be late 40s. It's often in late 50s and into their 60s, but they're casting forward for the next round of vision or strategy related to it. And they begin to see they won't be in that leadership seat when that strategy goes live and starts to succeed. And that means they've got to have people underneath them ready to step in. And if they haven't addressed it already, it becomes a time quite often of panic because I don't have a successor. We don't have the team that we need. And I could tell you a number of stories where that really did create panic. But that third turn's a very special time where you can, as I said earlier, propel a successor into the future, when you can work at future value and legacy and succession, and you can spend more time generating ideas and seeing them come into being while others are running the business and demonstrating their leadership capacity. So first turn is about where all of us will spend a part of our career. Second turn, the studies that we've worked at show only about 14% of anybody who enters the US employment anyway, about 14% will be invited to lead an organization. And only about 14% of those will have the opportunity to be a third turn leader, or what we might even call a maestro level leader.
Interesting. Kind of another topic I have for you is I recently did a video and had a guest, and he was saying that to go and work for a corporation, which in the past that was the smart and safe thing to do. And now the problem with that is corporations can't be trusted. So everybody's going out and creating their and starting their own company. So where does executive leadership fall into this? Do you see more people needing the skills, or are they needing to evaluate these in their leaders before they sign up for a company?
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about the economy when I say we're in a growth environment, but we are in a growth environment in that there will always be leaders and ones who aspire to leadership and ones who might be blocked from getting there on the current path that they're on because there are more people. And when that happens, it gives life to more organizations and new ideas. And so there's really a couple of pathways there. One is where an organization really is deliberate about developing executive leaders. And if they're very deliberate about it, they will produce in their incubating system more leaders than they can actually employ. And so the really astute ones will bless their marketplace by helping those people that they're developing land in really pleasant places in other organizations, maybe a vendor, maybe even a competitor, maybe a customer. And then they've got really well-developed leaders in the other organizations that touch their ecosystem. So they don't hardly lose And when they do that really well, they may even have opportunity to recruit them back for a position that is opened up that wasn't open then. So they really incubate a number of people, recognizing that they're going to have to send some of them because there's no way they can contain them all inside of a single organization. So that's one pathway. But the other one that often shows up is that they're not being blessed. In fact, strong leadership gifts, generative, creative leadership types aren't allowed to live into their gifting where they're employed. So what do? They go start something. They might go get hired elsewhere, but now they're not particularly friendly to the ecosystem that refused them opportunity. And so that can become a problem. But for many, they're going for a place where they can actually use their gifts. And as you were pointing out, a number of them will just start businesses. They'll just go and show that they can do it, and they'll be doing it because they weren't given opportunity. So they'll bootstrap, they'll do anything to really live into that passion. So those are all pathways. And in my work, I'm listening for the person who may have some issues with where they came from. How do we work through that so they're not motivated by anger, but rather by opportunity and a desire to complete a mission? And for those who are inside an organization, they've been blessed and they've had opportunity, they've had maybe even a lot of protection. What we're listening for and trying to help them work through is how they build their resilience in place for the first time they're really in charge of something and it didn't go well and they've got to figure something out and there's not, maybe support is removed from them. But those are both pathways that are out there.
Yeah, interesting. And, it reminds me of, all of the kind of the successful entrepreneurs, and they just went out and started their own company. And
Yeah.
it was,
After being told no, and you can't, and you're not allowed, and you shouldn't. And why
yeah,
would you want to? Well, I'm just going to show you I can. And they do.
yeah. It was interesting because I was having a conversation with another, and he was giving advice to someone who wanted, and he was just saying, just like, why do people go and work for Amazon or Microsoft or Meta when you have all these smart kids and all they gotta do is start their own companies, find the problem, solve it, and the guy was like, yeah, it's not that easy, but
No, it's not. It's not. And I know because of your background in healthcare, this might be of interest to you. And my own journey in starting a business, it was easier because of that passion to do this kind of work. It was easier to do that than to stay employed. My wife, my first wife, who's now deceased, was very, very ill. And it was before Obamacare and all of the things that have now made some accessibility larger. But I could not control my medical spend, and my company wasn't willing to expand the medical coverage for what became a 15, 16-year disease that my wife had with many procedures. So I got into a spot, started a business to control my own economy so I could determine what I would spend on healthcare benefits. And that's what let me buy, until my wife was on disability, a Cadillac insurance policy where I didn't have to spend all that time, debating and trying to get a deal on the next drug that she had to have, or to try to figure out if I could owe $200 less on the next x-ray. I mean, that just takes up everybody's time. And my entrepreneurial gifts, among many other things, helps us see that through.
yeah. Another question I have for you is, what is Bildung?
I love that question. So Bildung is a German word, and it's just one of those words that in English don't translate easily. And we are familiar with some of these words like shalom or aloha or salam or ubuntu. And Bildung is one coming out of Germany, but the Scandinavian countries, late 1800s, really appropriated it. And the basic definition, best I can do, is to say this posture of continuing to grow, continuing to learn, never thinking that you're done. And we do this not just as individuals, we do this together. So I'd like you to picture some people who worked on farms, field hands in Norway or Sweden, coming in after they've been in the fields all day long. It's sunset in the summer, and which is, very late at night or even early in the morning. And they're going to their little church where there's a meeting room of some kind, and they're teaching each other to read, or talking about what it means to not just be identified with a certain clan, with a family group, but to be a part of a nation, a part of a larger peoplehood who had aspirations for their children and their grandchildren. And this became a major way that the Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, came through where other countries were the Industrial Revolution. They did not have that same experience. They moved into modernity and now have the government that everybody kind of looks at around the world and says, wow, we wish that we had the infrastructure that you have, the way that you approach education, the way that you offer healthcare and those kinds of things. So Bildung was a national, multi-nation effort to help each other grow and become participants in their own destinies rather than just being told you're a peasant, live on the land, pay the landlord. That's all you can ever be. And carrying that spirit forward is what's being talked about in the modern Bildung movement. How do we not become trapped by the limitations around us and engage in our own learning, and not just for our own benefit and growth, but for all of those we touch, our family, our community, and certainly our descendants.
Very interesting. And I just love these terminology and phrases, like the Japanese have ikigai, and
Yes.
also kanai, constant never ending improvement.
Yeah. 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 And there's a weaving happening right now among, let's say, Maori tribes people in New Zealand and Scandinavians and South Africans and others who might have that terminology in that sense, but they've kind of found each other and say, I think we mean the same thing. Let's talk about how we do this. It's been really cool to watch.
Yeah. A follow-up question I have for you, because you talked about groups and you talk about get good at group work, and a lot of the people listening to the show, they're entrepreneurs, they're solopreneurs, they hate group work, but you say it's
Yeah.
where most decisions are made that affect our lives.
Well, it's true. I mean, the family groups that we're in, the communities that we live in, the governments under which we live and pay taxes have committees and they have groups and they make decisions, and it affects larger populations. And so almost anything that we will do, like seeking an investment from a bank, we can't just do it by ourselves. We can't just declare it and therefore it is. We exist in connection with other people. And it's not just then about how do I communicate better and be more persuasive. Those are good things to work on. However, the most important thing to work on is our ability to listen, and to listen so well that we can represent another person's point of view to the end where they would say, yes, you understand me. Yes, you said it better than I did. Because if they're able to do that, now I can say, all right, now that I understand you, and now that I got assurance, and so do you, that I am tuned into what you're talking about. Now I'd like to share with you what my values are. Can we go there now? And we're doing it that way so that it's not talking over the top of each other, but engaging in a dialogue where I'm prepared to learn, even as I offer my points of view. And I'm showing that I grant you the same dignity that I'm demanding, or I would want to demand that you show me. But it starts with me giving that to you, making sure I understand you. And when we develop that skill, we're going to be far more effective in group work. And one quick illustration of how this works, and this is something I learned long ago to volunteer for, and found that it's one of the best contributions I can make. I don't need to lead a meeting. I don't need to be a participant at every meeting, but any of them that I'm in, if there is no one there to keep a record of the meeting, I volunteer to do that, so that I am put from the beginning into a listening mode, not into a telling mode. So I can draw in the information and organize it and then hold it up. So that, because I'm keeping the record, I can say, is this what we're talking about? Let's look at this here on the screen, or I'm going to distribute a report to you. Let's just make sure we've got this right. Do I have the why, the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how? It also gives me opportunity in the middle of the meeting to say, we're talking about taking a next action step, but it's not clear if we're going to hand this to someone when we would want them to conclude their work, or who actually would be the decision maker here, who actually would be following through. And armed with those listening questions, I help to give shape to the scope of the work and to its direction without, demanding how it should take shape. I just listen in that way. And the more of us who come to a meeting prepared to listen and gather and organize, the better we will be in group work, and the more effective and shorter those meetings will be. We won't have to have a meeting about the meeting to recall what we met about, and then have faulty memories because we don't have a great record. So group work, the more we do it, the more effective it becomes, the fewer meetings we actually have to have, which is a wonderful outcome.
Yeah, so well said. And, the audience can really tell that you're. So, a follow-up question I have for you is, you talk about process consulting and
Mhm.
executive advising, and how are those different than coaching?
Oh, that's a favorite question of mine. So, coaching tends, it's not exclusive and they're not hard and fast lines, but coaching tends to focus on the individual. And it's often facing forward to what that individual wants to do next. It might touch on their work or on their leadership skills, but it tends to be centered on the individual. Now, I'm going to go over to another side of this pathway and talk about consulting in general, which tends to be more, I call it increasingly contracting or subject matter expertise or being a vendor of information. When you're consulting in that way and more telling, well, now you're not asking, and you're offering a framework, a tool, a something that they should then do because you have seen it before and you know well. So coaching, I'm asking, I'm working on the individual. Consulting, I tend to be working more on a solution, and it's often organizational. With executive advising, you're living at an intersection of both the organization and the person or people who lead it. And so you're really working at the place they come together. And that intersection builds the capacity of both. As the leaders grow their capacity, it makes it more possible to be lived in the organization. And the more the organization creates capacity, the more it's going to challenge those leaders to grow. And seeing that interplay and helping to coax that along will be the work of executive advising. And this is where the organizational part comes out. Organizations can't just flit around and take their time and say, well, let's talk about this next year or whatever, and continue to succeed. So there's often a time pressure involved. So an executive advisor, without saying, here's what you should do, will often bring the lenses or a framework, a way of seeing what could be addressed, and then can inject those kinds of questions or bring that framework so that as the client participates in the work, they are more ready to learn or to see a possibility and then to begin to have ownership for what they do from there. So that's that way of talking about where executive advising lives. And executive advising can kind of modulate over to coaching or over to straight up subject matter expertise. Process consulting kind of sits underneath that executive advising, which is if I'm that executive advisor and you've invited me to join you into the problem solving, then I'll bring in a more formal way, well, why does this matter to you? And if you're going to address this, who's going to play what role? Who's going to who's the decision maker? Who's the funder? Who's going to do the work? Who's supervising? You kind of tease all that out and you kind of work through why, who, what, when, where, how, so that you have a process that reflects the client's desires, their objectives, their words, but now it's mapped. You now have an artifact of that process so you can keep coming back to it, seeing where you were, seeing where you are, and where you'll go next. So process consulting often is a way that the executive advisor can get in and walk alongside a client.
Thanks so much for coming on to the podcast, and really great. And, tell people how they can find you. And thanks so much again.
Yeah, well, that middle initial L is so important here. So marklvincent.com is a way you can just kind of get access to anything I'm touched with, a few books I've written and the kind of clients I work with. And what I really enjoy is when someone calls up and says, hey, can we talk about something? Have you ever seen anything like this before? And the answer is, you know what? No, probably haven't. This sounds like unique. It sounds like you've succeeded your way into a new problem. And that's why you don't have a great list of resources to go to. So let's dig in and figure stuff out. That's the most fun I get to have.
Yes, excellent. And thanks again, and keep up the great work.
Well, you as well. I'm really impressed with the legacy that you're building for yourself, and may you succeed in every way.